As most of you know, I'm John Garver. I teach here in the School of International Affairs. And it's my honor and pleasure to welcome Professor Zhu Feng to Georgia Tech, to Atlanta, and to the School of International Affairs. Dr. Zhu was born in Jiangsu province. Jiangsu is the province just west of Shanghai on the Yangtze River. The city of Suzhou. Suzhou is one of China's most famous, beautiful cities, famous for its the canals and gardens and beautiful women. He studied undergraduate work at Beijing University in International Politics, and in 1991 received his PhD in International Politics from Beijing University. He's currently a professor in the School of International Studies at Beijing University, Beida, as well as the Deputy Director of the Beida Center for International and Strategic Studies, and is a senior advisor to the Director of the Center for International and Strategic Studies, Wang Jisi, who's one of the major foreign policy advisors of the Chinese government. He's also recently become the Executive Director of Collaborative Innovation Center for South China Sea Studies at Nanjing University, and the Stand-Up-and-Do Center at Nanjing University. Nanjing is just up the river from actually down the river, I guess, from Suzhou. He's also currently a visiting fellow at Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. He's the author of a number of books on ballistic missile defense and international security, IR theory and East Asian security, China's ascent, power security, and the future of international politics. He's the author of many journal articles on East Asian regional security, the North Korean nuclear issue, and U.S.-China relations. He's on the board of editors on the editorial board of many academic journals, and consults with the Chinese government and private sector. He's a frequent commentator on Chinese television and commentator in the newspaper on Chinese foreign policy and U.S.-China relations. And we're honored to have him as a guest here at Georgia Tech. He came to give a talk at the Carter Center and has graciously agreed to come and talk to us. So would you please join me in welcoming Professor Zhu Feng.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Professor Garver, inviting me here. It's truly my big pleasure. I think China today in the U.S. and in the world as well is a very hot business, but there's quite a few professors like Professor John Garver, who is so knowledgeable and insightful to the China's foreign policy history and China's current the situation. So I'm very jealous to all of you. So then Georgia Tech just offer a very great China study program. Two of my friends, Professor John Garver and Wang Feiling, the faculty member here. So my presentation will getting through the 3 points. First point is what is happening to the China-U.S. relations. What kind of things now they're joining some sort of historical comparison to ongoing change of our relations. Second point I want just to share with you is what is at stake to put our relations in some sort of vulnerable, shaky position, or what things now the bilateral relations between Washington and Beijing risk. Third, in what way, or some sort of anxiety for the relationship between Washington and Beijing could just being diffused and even reasonably just approached. Okay, first of all, I see the China-U.S. relations really changed. This year marked the 35 years of the normalization. So after the normalization, 35 years passed, then what makes the difference for our bilateral relations? We can easily figure out a couple of the points. For example, 35 years ago, what just drove our normalization? What forced the President Jimmy Carter to brush aside a lot of domestic anti-communist hatred and concluding the normalization with Beijing. Then a couple of obstacles also, it seemed to me, very tactically addressed. The Taiwan issue, normalizing the relations with Beijing, while the President Jimmy Carter very smartly adopted the Taiwan Relation Act, continuously committing the United States to Taiwan's democratization and Taiwan's assistance to its traditional allies in Asia. I think the most important point behind the Jimmy Carter's China aspiration for the normalization is we have a common enemy, Soviet Union. So that factor pulled both sides much beyond some sort of a difference. That time, the difference is really, really huge. It's huge, let's say. For example, so what's the Chinese? Back to the end of the 70s, I think quite a few Americans will offer some sort of a full description. China is communist, China is speaking Mandarin, China is isolated for long, China is completely different culture. But today, Chinese Americans, we know each other very well, right? So we have a huge and massive flowing of the peoples. So now the Chinese students account for nearly 1/4 of the foreign students who are now just studying and learning in the United States. So we're biggest, the source of foreign students for Americans' higher education. Then in my university, Peking University, Nanjing University, I also see the numbers of American students increased very, very rapidly. So everywhere I can see the American students. So then common enemy-driven relationship, back to 35 years ago. Second, it's some sort of romantic feeling based our perception. Also dominate our relations. So Chinese anti-Soviet Union, Chinese usually is underdeveloped by Chinese, what's the China? China's land, China's size, China's history. So for the most of Americans, their view of China sounds a little bit lousy, right? So romantic. So then the entire 80s, our bilateral relations described as some sort of, we say, honeymoon relations. China become the quasi-alliance to the United States. We got the arms sale from Pentagon. We established the joint military observatory station to monitor the Soviet Union. That time, China's human rights issue was much worse than time being. But there's quite little human rights concern to China. But I think second change since in 1979, of course, we say common enemy completely disappeared. So what's something that's new grew to keep the both sides together? We also have some sort of very essential elements to examine what sort of elements now just getting us together. First, we say it's some sort of commercial utility, because reform and open up China is a bigger market. So it'll get a lot, American business people found a lot of, the opportunity investing, manufacturing, and doing the business in China. So then the figure of our trading value is really hiking. It's unbelievable. I think in 1979, the total trading value is 3.6 billion US dollar. But today, back to the 2013, what's the trading value between two countries? It's around 500 billion. US is number one export market for China. Then we're number 3 trading partner to the United States. So such a, we say, flowing of the goods, service, investment across Pacific Ocean is unbelievable and fantastically growing stronger and bigger. So now we have a big, we say, commercial connection. They keep both sides not just a highly co-independent, but we are more exactly, we have to say our relations in terms of economy and commerce were highly symbiotic. It is reality. If you're trying to buy something at a Walmart, then everybody know maybe most of the items made in China. And even in China, for example, so what just to get the Chinese university students feel very happy for some sort of their fashion or their clothes brand. It's apparel. It's some sort of, we say, American brand. So they make the Chinese students also got very familiar. So then economically, yes, we're very, very good. But the problem is now such an attraction of economic relations also is getting sour because we're competitive either. So U.S. is worried outsourcing, for example, to China, just lead to the undercut of the job. Then U.S. want to just insource back some sort of your overseas manufacturing. On the other hand, China now is pushing for the internationalization of Chinese currency, RMB. Is that possible for China's RMB become some sort of leading rival and will shake up Americans, the dominance of U.S. dollars in the world currency? The third one is also come up. For example, the market access, intellectual property rights protection, and some sort of, we say, equal treatment to their investors on each country. I think a lot of debate also come over. Then another point also followed up. Investment and commercial relations in the way of national security. So when we'll see increasing number of such commercial, the stresses. So China's telecom icon, Huawei wants to invest in U.S., but they was just very severely restrained because for the purpose of national security. If China also raised the threshold of national security to ban Americans' investment flowing, then I have to say commercial relations, originally it's a strong group to get both sides closer, now is turning some sort of a new battlefield. So then we also see commercial relations is a little bit turning some sort of sour. We can't just simply believe commercial relations as long as it's getting bigger and getting more broad, then our relations will be destined to be stable and better. So even economically, our relations is getting competitive, some sort of oriented. So then it's a second biggest change. Economic relations, yes, it's good. It's still very strong, but the problems in one way is affect our relations. In history, it's mostly positive, but now it's very complex. And the third one is, I think 20 years ago, China's POA capability was just like some sort of, we say, fly speck. It could be neglected in the eyes of PACOM. Then 15 years ago, China's naval capability is some sort of a small blip in a radar screen. No Americans' naval captains will take very seriously. But today, Pentagon rarely take the China's naval capability more seriously. So then it's a military capability driven anxiety now is persuading. For example, 20 years ago, China once used the military coerce driving away the Philippines from disputed island at the South China Sea. Then it didn't cause a lot of protesting and concern from the United States. In the past 10 years, Beijing never tried any military coercion, driving away the Filipinos and the Vietnamese out of disputed South China Sea territory. But why now the South China Sea become a leading concern? Yes, President Obama now is touring Asia. So if you listen what he said at the Tokyo yesterday, he strongly assured the Americans allies, U.S. will never keep the hand off if allies will be attacked. But the problem is, from the Chinese perspective, I never see the China will attack the Japan for taking the Senkaku Diaoyu Island back. I will tell you the reason. But anyway, we also see such a military capability-driven anxiety now is dominating the essential mood feeling on both sides. So U.S. not just take China more seriously, but also just has a strong anxiety. Probably China will squeeze the U.S. for space in West Pacific arena. So sooner or later, both sides will collide. So China now is racing for regional hegemony. Okay, first, with the illusion of a common threat, our relations has been long, pickily, and troublingly just rebased. Then back to the 90s, we also see a leading factor behind the engaging China policy under the Bill Clinton administration is some sort of a commercial utility. But now it's also getting elusive. It's eroded greatly because China's getting bigger. So China-U.S. commercial relations, yes, it's still mutually benefiting, but the problems somehow well competitive. Then if we look at move on to some sort of a security field, what's the China-U.S. relations by definition? We're a strategic rival. Okay, 35 years later, some sort of essential elements to underscore the feasibility of the normalization completely gone. Then a couple of very fundamental change, not just the jump over to the new high, but also suddenly and very dramatically turning into the new reality. Okay, the question is, what's the China-U.S. relations? We used to be enemy before the Nixon shock in 1972. Then we were very close friends after normalization and even become the quasi-allies. We're hugging each other. Then with the collapse of the Soviet Union, some sort of a traditional, we say, idealism-driven, some sort of relationship cooled down. A lot of people got eluded. Then they returned to the reality. So in time 90s, there was a very hot and a bit debate about China policy. So then Bill Clinton's engaging China become a leading component of America's Asian policy and the China strategy as well. I think such an engaging China policy usually based on the two very interesting intellectual requisites. One is U.S. should be less afraid of rising China. I remember very, very vividly, back to 1995, Professor Michael Oxenberg published leading articles at Foreign Affairs, outlining his view of China's future. Professor Oxenberg emphasized in his such a leading piece at the Foreign Affairs of in 1995. He said, no worry about stronger or more powerful China. If we look at China's history, until China getting powerful enough to challenge the U.S., China also just tumbling down from the tips of their power mountain. That means the historical logic show China is always harder to escape out of some sort of such a historical matrix. China is always just how they get rise, become powerful, then entrapped in domestic implosion and tampering down. Then after the dozens of years or 100 years, then China will climb up again. Then rising, getting powerful, then downturn again. So Professor Oxenberg picked a very, very central point occurring to China's history and China's future. That means China is a bigger power, always being entangled with domestic challenges. Then their ability to settle the domestic challenge has never been assured. So before China could be powerful enough to challenge the U.S., that's kind of the logic will re-performed again, outperformed China's some sort of international behavior which will target the U.S. I think this piece is great. So I think it's a very interesting one. Then second requisite is reform and open China will eventually reshape the China's domestic skyline. Then China will become democratic. Then democratic China will be certainly less menacing China. So reform and open up will help reloot the China's future and finally end up with the collapse of a communist system. So James Mann, he published a China fantasy book 3 years ago. He's strongly powerful with such a logic. But now I think we may have some sort of a third explanation or third represent to rebase the Americans' successful policy of China. How U.S. can change the China, how U.S. can feel comfortable about a more powerful China. Then we can pick up some sort of interesting logic out of the rebalancing strategy. That means U.S. will maintain enough might and partners to reshape the China's future. That means deterrence, alliance-based, some sort of a power clouds will be effective enough to reshape the China for its future. That's also a big, the feasibility behind the rebalancing, strategy. Okay, this strategy is mostly rests on deterrence, mutual determination, re-enhancement of mutual alliance. So now we have to see how such a third requisite or third logic also will take the effects. So then that's my first point. 35 years later, China-U.S. relations dramatically changed. We moved through a couple of the underlying factors, but now we are facing some sort of new tipping point. We have to embrace some sort of a new paradigm to underscore the endurable stability and cooperation between the both countries. So rebalance is not just a strategy, pivoting or make the U.S. pivoting away from Middle East and pivoting back to the Asia. But it seemed to me it's some sort of a very powerful description of the new logic facing some sort of a rising China and a growing assertiveness of China's behavior. So this strategy is not just materialized some sort of a strong deterrence vis-a-vis China, and also very interestingly outlined some sort of a new logic behind your factual policy of China. Second, I have to say, when the China-U.S. relation becomes some sort of a strategic rival, how China responds. There's a lot of assumptions here. Hypothetically, just for example, just point to some sort of China's historical turn of our foreign policies. And someone also described recent years, China's foreign policy presents some sort of a DNA change. DNA change means traditionally Beijing's policy is 韬光养晦, right, in low profile. But now China turned on to more assertive and even more aggressive. So China's international behavior in terms of a pattern and the modes are completely changed. But I have to say, I disagree with this some sort of basic assumption. No, I don't think China's foreign policy completely changed. Yes, China now, I agree that China's foreign policy is going more assertive. But the problem is, while China's foreign policy going more assertive, I think it's some sort of, we say, mood change the consequence. It's not a ground strategy change the consequence. The reason is China now is a bigger power. So China's assertiveness is the spontaneous outcome of the China's great power status. When you're getting bigger, when you're getting powerful, then you will still just stay the same. It's hard. International relations is social life. We always live very decent, the compost, classmate. But the problem is when you're getting some sort of a successful, when you're getting bigger, not many people can still just act very decently and gracefully. I think it's very consensual social phenomenon. I think China is that case. China, I have to say maybe it's a very bad metaphor. I have to say my country now is 800-pound gorilla. When it's walking through the forest, it always makes a bend. So don't take any bends made by China as some sort of evidence of assertiveness. Let me give you an example. South China Sea. Now the U.S. tone up some sort of alert over the China's risk-taking behavior. But I can assure you completely, I don't think that China will punch the Vietnam or take down the Filipino, whatever how furious and emotion or frictions over disputed are turning. The reason very simple. So we are very asymmetrical, right? If the Chinese turning Filipinos and Vietnamese into the ground and get the knee down, we will feel pride of this. So domestic debate about China's policy of Vietnamese and Philippines, it seems to me it goes in very sobering. Media's nationalistic clamor very interestingly contrasts some sort of with a soberly mainstream in a foreign policy debate. So we needed to know the difference. China now is in transition. The CPC needed some sort of a nationalist clamor to justify the ruling legitimacy. But it doesn't mean the Beijing's foreign policy course completely straight off, because we still have no way to swing to some sort of risk-taking foreign policy. Reason is simple. First, domestic preoccupation remain a sweeping factor for China's leader. We could have a lot of debate for that, right? For example, Xi Jinping came to power. He very enthusiastically inaugurated an anti-corruption campaign. He wants to bring the change to China, but the most important and designed change is domestic rather than international. But where's the China's some sort of such an unfinished domestic transformation? The sense of insecurity is always a haunting factor for Chinese leader. So they always have to just struggling for some sort of legitimacy for their policy initiative. So international relations, unfortunately, become genuinely and exactly the nationalistic domain. So no leader want to be conceivably some sort of a chicken. So rhetorically and literally, their words make themselves sounds very, very resolved, very firm. But just I say, we needed to know what to make the difference between rhetoric and reactions. Second evidence I want to give you is that given China's growing influence and rising power, the international response to China is also getting extremely vulnerable and fragile. Then I also see a lot of overstatement of the China's threat. For example, Japanese always keep, just murmuring, China will attack the Senkaku Diaoyu Island. Even yesterday, President Obama was challenged by Japanese journalists. The journalist asked him a very bitter question. If China attacked the Senkaku Island, how can U.S. respond? President Obama returned with bitter smiling. Because why Japanese always just have such an imaginary, the thinking, it's also some sort of paranoid thinking about upcoming China attack to the Senkaku Diaoyu Island. What's the Senkaku Diaoyu Island? It's a testing ground for the Chinese nationalism. It's also a testing point for the new leaders, some sort of resolve to safeguard the China's sovereignties. But behind that, what's the Senkaku Diaoyu Island? It's non-inhabited islands, rocks. What's the China, Japan? We're number 2, number 3 biggest economies. You think we really will take that seriously to resort to the military mean, fighting the wars just over some sort of rocks? It's a conventional Western. Yes, Chinese people and the government drum up nationalism, but I don't think they will be that crazy to really take the military conflict vis-a-vis Japanese. So my view is that be easy. China is a rational actor, right? So China's leader, Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang, they're nationalistic politicians, but necessarily they are also pragmatic leader. That's also some sort of a very magic the combination of China's foreign relations. We needed to tell the difference from some sort of nationalistic, we say, covering. China's foreign policy always been very vividly pulled by nationalism. But we also needed to know some sort of nuanced difference because at the core, it's a still lingering pragmatism. It's not just domestic preoccupation driven. On the other hand, that's what I want to tell you. I feel a little bit released about our relations. No matter it is strategic rival, it's some sort of with a formidable competitor. 3 factors keep our relations very structurally constrained. First is power disparity remains steady between Washington and Beijing. China's Navy getting bigger, but very nascent. I don't think we're at any position to challenge the American Navy. We're just trying to, at the maximum, exercise some sort of near-sea denial. What does near-sea denial mean? We don't want the U.S. just now say, completely isolated China from some sort of a maritime access. We also want just to respond in a way as China can to some sort of futures flashpoint, for example, Taiwan. Then Senkaku Island either. If the Japanese take the further provocation. It's a Chinese worry, right? Japanese worry when China will attack the Senkaku Diaoyu Island from Chinese logic. We're also worried if the Japanese take some sort of real and concrete actions and overtaking the islands, it will force China to respond. Then, based on the alliance commitment, U.S. also will intervene. Such a worst-case scenario will magnify some sort of a Chinese fear. If the Japan unilaterally doing something more, how can we respond? So I have to say yes. Our naval and air force capability building is reinforced fast, but it's mainly targeting some sort of Western near-sea denial. So it's China's Navy remain much far from some sort of competing with the U.S. Americans' regional preponderance has never been getting what? Getting, I have to say, attainable, just due to the die factor of China. Now U.S. is reaping the minus from rising China because most of regional members really feel pressured. So they want to pull two giants together. So insecurity, most of regional members now is decisively leaning toward the U.S., repositioning as themselves. Now U.S. feel very comfortable. They are taking advantage of the shorthand of China's foreign relations when we're getting bigger. China's foreign relations is really outweigh some sort of China's growing influence. The reason is very simple. My theory is China remains to be adolescent power. China is not very mature power. So we make up a lot of a mess. So another point I have to say is this. Even psychologically, I don't think that China now is getting some sort of pissed off. Then we will have to just compete the U.S. by flexing the muscle. Looking at the Chinese number of Chinese students, generation after generation, Chinese young people coming, studying in the U.S. What's your university charge? Emory University is grade 1. Your tuition charge is unbelievable. It's more than $50,000 per school year, right? You know what's my university's tuition charge? Peking University is top university in China. Every school year, undergraduates, the tuition charge is less than $2,000. I love the U.S. I hate the Americans' university college tuition charge. It's so high, so expensive. But even with this, look at the Chinese. How many Chinese now studying in the U.S.? All kinds of students, primary students, school students, high school students, university college students, more than 1/4 billion. Second, overseas students also India. The number of Chinese students is 5 times Indians. If your university and colleges would like to lower the threshold of admission, I have to tell you, the number of Chinese students will quickly surpass 500,000. Enormous Chinese young students coming to the U.S. bring with their families, saving. After 4 years, 5 years, or 7 years, they then got to the diploma and getting back what they come with back to China. American idea. So then I have to say it's a very, very important structural constraint. U.S. now is a lot of, we say, suppress over idea and the man-state interfering. You are leading source, rearming the Chinese young generation. You are also breeding base to create some sort of Chinese thoughts. It's, in my eyes, it's a big constraint. Okay, third one is we also see some sort of the number of arms. If the China-U.S. get into the conflict, there's a long list on the American side. Very, very short list on the Chinese side. I have to say it's a very, very important complementary to the U.S. It's a big supplement to your power positions. Then it's also another structure posed restraint to China. So I haven't seen some sort of, we say, dramatic power transfer now is on the way. There's some sort of slightly, we say, projected the power shift. But as a whole, the power transition remain unfading, remain very fading. Okay, let me come to my conclusion. How can we respond? First, I have to say we needed to not just a cool down, we need to realistically just diagnose who is some sort of a new reality of such a rival relations. International relation is a dirty job. China is getting bigger. Given the China's size and history, at the most, China is cooperator. China will never be a sincere follower to the U.S. I hope such a historical matrix makes sense to everybody. If we look at the Asian's modernization and the westernization in the past 170 years, we see a good number of followers, Japan, Korean, some ASEAN countries. But big guys, Asia, they're always at the maximum is cooperate. China, India. So don't count the China into some sort of such a very, full heart follower, just as the Korean and Japan. Even India is the same. India openly supports the Moscow for annexation of the Crimea. You can imagine why India want to do that. Because India want to project its uniqueness in the power position. Second, I think we need some sort of, we say, reasonable and visionary statesman. For example, China shouldn't just overreach. That will be very risky and dangerous if we want just expanding out of the China's legal reach. But U.S. don't need overreact. So future relations based on circle of action and reactions. If both sides could exercise some sort of restraint, our relations will be good. Last one. I think we needed to know the nuanced some sort of difference now, just sitting between the both countries. Most important difference is not some sort of a strategically we're truly moving closer to the collision. The leading difference challenging both sides for the time being is domestic politics. Xi Jinping needed some sort of nationalistic foreign relations. Now look at the United States. U.S. military is suffer from segregation, defense cut, budget cuts. So you need China as a formidable challenger and competitor to justify, the redressing of your cut to the military budget. Then interest the group. Then some sort of contending domestic agendas. Those things, rather than strategical turning around or something like that, is redefining our agenda. So most uncertainty came from domestic politics rather than strategic readjustment or recalibration. Let me stop here, John.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we have a few minutes for Q&A. Phil?
I think I have one. Yeah. You talked about the Senkaku Islands, the linkages between the use of the Senkaku Islands to build nationalism, but the conflict between Japan and China would not happen because it would not escalate to that point. I'm just wondering what the second order effects domestically if the Chinese government were not to act militarily in the event of if they stepped down, if they showed weakness or.
No.
Would that hurt the
Okay.
parties domestically?
Okay, yeah. I think it's a very good question. First of all, if we look at the first order of the strategy or the military options, yes, I see neither of the side would like to fight. I think this reality is almost predictable. But second order facts, the domestic factors, then we will see some sort of tension will linger. The reason is, for example, from the Chinese perspective, yes, we can show some sort of growing flexibility. But such a China's flexibility also should be conditioned by some sort of reciprocating move from Japan. For example, so far Japan continued to refuse to recognize the existence of territorial disputes. We consider it some sort of Japan's cocky and arrogant, elements in the policy. So it's particularly irritating to Chinese. So then the China's bottom line is that without Japan's recognition of existence of the territorial disputes, no setback. Then for Japan, they also feel it's a very paradoxical question. They consider if they recognize its territorial disputes existing, China may less inflexible and become more intrusive. So then my view is that so far both sides much hijacked by domestic factors. So then what kind of the option we can work out? I think first of all, both sides needed to talk. So I strongly oppose to some sort of, we say, turning back policy. So far, the political context really on the cat. But no matter how tense the relationship is, we need to talk. We need to dispatch the envoy. We need to, just to deliver some sort of the messages in a way very serious. So first of all, I really hope that both sides could realistically, handle the relationship. Getting both sides in contact is very important. The second, I think, Chinese and Japanese, we should have some sort of a ground bargaining. But before the ground bargaining, we should have ground compromising. For example, Senkaku issue is part of entire history problem. If the Abe-san continue to visit the Yasukuni Shrine, I don't think there will be any proper climate where entertain the settlement of Senkaku Diaoyu Island issue. So then China-Japan relations very complicated. All such conflicting issues interrelated. So we need some sort of the way to move the issues, monolithically into some sort of a positive direction. So we need, as I say, ground reconciliation.
Other questions?
Please.
One. This is kind of maybe a historical question, but what are your thoughts on the use of Maoist guerrillas during, or Mao's strategy of sponsoring guerrilla groups in Southeast Asia and that sort of thing during the 60s? Does that point to, is that kind of an outlier in speaking of an aggressive foreign posture, or does it refer back to domestic politics, as you said, a lot of these IR strategies do?
Good question. I think Professor Garver is much better than me to answer such a question. But my impression that look at China's match into ASEAN, South Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We're never ideological. We're just a very mercantilist. So China's global engagement so far is very mercantilist. So we has no interest at all in those guerrillas. We never consider they are a foreign policy tool. We consider they are troublemaker. So, Philippine-based some sort of a Mao guerrilla, such a communist guerrilla. Yeah, we didn't do anything. We consider they are completely disruption rather than some sort of assistance. So there's no connection at all. Even at Papua New Guinea, there is some sort of pro-China, communist, we say rebellions. But Chinese government feel very scared about their, some sort of expanding influence. So today's China, I think, is completely different from Maoist China. So some sort of essential pattern of the China pursuing the national interest is fundamentally changed. So we will never extend any support to such a rebellion force. Instead, we consider they are a trouble because Beijing wants to invade the mining. So such a guerrilla always threaten the mining workers. Yeah.
Professor Zhu, thank you very, very much.
Okay.